Imagine a world where women have more time to explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for women leaders and founders ready to unlearn conventional rules and lead their businesses of significance. Held for counter status quo ideas and a whole dose of feminine perspective, this is our 10th series. My name's Lulu Mintz. I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today, I'm going to create that same space right here for you on this podcast. Welcome to episode 143 of She Rebel Radio, the traps and triggers of women leaders. Welcome, ladies. I'm going to share some nuggets of gold with you today. After 8 years of coaching women leaders just like you, and in my second personal growth cycle of my business in coaching women leaders just like you, a client who was coming to the end of her coaching with me, we were working together for 3 months with 6 sessions, asked me a killer of a question. Well, it was 2 questions really, and I thought it would make an amazing podcast episode to share with you as the traps and the triggers that women leaders struggle with may well resonate. And that's the exact question my client asked me, is what are the 3 most common traps that the women you've worked with have faced or struggled with, and what are the 3 most common triggers? So after I shared my answers with my client, she responded and said, yeah, I resonate with every single one of them. And it was that resonating with every single one of them. I said to her, you know what? I think you might have just created a podcast episode for me, as I feel called to share this for the summer series, as it's totally relevant to what we've been talking about so far in terms of empowerment, our leadership as women. So I'm super excited to dive in and share with you the 3 most common traps and triggers of women leaders that I've come across in my 8 years of coaching women leaders just like you. So stay tuned. Now, the first trap that we are going to explore is, and remembering when we're saying trapped, we mean we're confined or hemmed in or constricted in some way. And the first trap that I see is not having the, I'm not going to use the word ability, but not being able to trust ourselves or themselves, of women leaders not being able to trust ourselves fully. That is one of the biggest traps. I shared a mantra recently, and on the last solo episode of I Trust Me, I Validate Me, I Back Me, it brought up a lot of emotion for women. And that is because one of the biggest traps we get stuck in is lacking self-trust. In our judgment, in what it is that we know, in our intuition, in our opinions. And, you know, on the previous episode, we were talking to Jules Lynch about, you know, working with girls in the global south and finding their voices and using their voices and having the trust to use their voice. And, you know, one of the reasons that we as women leaders struggle with this or still question ourselves about, you know, whether what we've got to say is valid or what we know is valid or what we feel is valid, is because we've grown up in a masculine world that we've squeezed ourselves to fit into, which means that we don't trust the feminine one and our own voices at various times. And sometimes I find this, actually, the stronger the voice is, the stronger the intuition is, the more wild that we want to be in something that we want to do or create, the bigger the challenge of having this self-trust within ourselves. And, you know, we have grown up in a world that causes us to question women and not trust women in positions of authority and leadership as men are trusted, and the knock-on effect of that is affecting our ability to trust ourselves fully and wholeheartedly. And, when we find a level of self-trust, there's always another level that we can go to deepen it. So that's a really great thing to work on. And I remind you of that mantra: I trust me, I validate me, I back me. The second trap, most common trap that women leaders struggle with, is not being able to create balance in our day to day. And we had in the International Women's Day series, Inspiring Your Day to Day, we had the founder from Docket, talking about her business and how that helps not just women, but, all people. But, women are particularly affected by this in managing our day-to-day admin. So do check out that episode. But this not being able to create balance within our day-to-day has been a massive trap for women. Can we really have it all? Is that a myth? And, how do we have all of that, whatever that may look like for you, a business and children or a top leadership position and, family balance, or, having the freedom to travel around the world and do what you want to do, and all of that stuff, is that we as women struggle with that balance. And, we aren't sure of what the narrative is around it. And there haven't been the generations of women before us that have, had the privilege often even of exploring this question. And one thing that's super critical and important that we remember is that, women, those of us that identify as women, those of us that feel like we resonate more with feminine energy, whatever you want to call it, are not linear. We are cyclical, which means that we don't necessarily, and there's studies around this and evidence to suggest with, employee interviews and things like that of women in leadership positions, is that we don't create balance day to day. We create it year to year almost, or depending on what phase we are in as women. And we have much clearer phases than our male counterparts do. And I'm doing lots of work with women on this at the moment in terms of their 7-year personal growth cycle and how we can really learn to leverage that. So, do give me a follow on social media and, become part of my email list and all of that stuff if that is something that is resonant for you, because I'm going to be talking to all of you more and more about this. And, the third part is having a lack of awareness of the phase that we are in. So it's this, that's the trap number 3, is that we don't have the awareness, the narrative, the education around what phase that we're in. That could be, in terms of our menstrual cycles, menopause, all of that stuff. We've had all of those conversations on She Rebel Radio over the past few years. Your personal growth cycle, which I'm, stepping up and sharing more with you all on your 7-year personal growth cycle. It's such fascinating work. Or even your life cycle, right? We have clear, distinct chapters and phases in our lives as women. So the 3 most common traps are self-trust, creating balance, and having a lack of awareness. And we can find ourselves confined, hemmed in, going round in circles and circles, trying to find answers to this stuff and coming up against brick walls. But, I hope we've been sharing some of those answers with you on She Rebel Radio and in the work that I do with clients. And what's really important, because I'm not necessarily giving you any, major solutions on this episode, is that, but it's definitely an invitation to come back and keep continuing to listen to She Rebel Radio and, the narrative that we've been sharing over the past 5 years. But it is also to know that we are not alone in terms of what is personal is universal, and it is for us as our experience as women that if those things are resonant with you, I'm sharing them as the 3 most common traps I've come across when working with clients and groups one-to-one. that self-trust, that constantly coming back to how can I create life-work balance, all of that stuff, and, having no awareness of what phase that we ourselves are in, and that women even have phases that we can actually kind of, distinguish from and learn to leverage the energy of the phase that we are in. We don't have to be linear or the straight line, because that is not who we are as women. And I'm super excited to share more about what I've got coming up with that work in 2024 and beyond. So they're the three most common traps. But, within that as well, I should say, when we realise, and I say this to women a lot, it may be that, one of the women who attended one of my retreats said, this was a few years ago, that she was really struggling with body image. And, everyone else was probably sitting there thinking, you look amazing. And I said to her, it's doing the personal development work, right? That's why lots of you are, here listening to She Rebel Radio. You're seekers, you're, finding the answers, working on yourselves. Is that we can do the personal work, but we cannot, potentially heal something or, work on something totally on our own when, 95% of the female population are struggling with the same thing. And the mainstream narrative, was, X Factor days and things like that, telling us that we were, too fat to be a singer, and all of those subliminal messages we've had as women growing up. So I just use that as an example. So they're the three most common traps. Do let me know on socials or elsewhere if that resonates. And here are the three most common triggers. Now, when we're triggered, we're set off or activated, and our nervous system may well be, is activated. We want to react, and sometimes, we don't even have the time between knowing that we're doing it and we're reacting, right? So they are triggers. The first most common trigger I come across is comparing ourselves to others, feeling like others are better than us, doing better than us, more, skilled than us, more successful. And, social media really contributes to that in a huge, huge way. And that trigger that we can react to, if you run a business or, you're in a leadership position or whatever it might be, and you see, or you've left one. That was one thing that my client was sharing with me. She'd left a leadership position. It wasn't working for her. It, was against all of her values. And, but she still sometimes sees other people that are really happy there and doing really well and going, why couldn't I just put up with it, right? Why couldn't I just be successful in that, even though it wasn't me? And that's comparing ourselves. Have I made the right decision? Then the self-trust comes in, right? All of that. So that comparing ourselves can really set off our nervous system, and all of a sudden, we're feeling bad about ourselves. We're not going for this next leadership position. We're not putting ourselves, in the picture for social media, in terms of if we're running a business, that we, suddenly decide, we're not going to take the action that we were going to do that day because our nervous system is activated by other people and thinking that they're better than us. So that is trigger number one. Trigger number two, which I've kind of bleeded into a little bit there, is being set off or activated by needing to be seen. And needing to be seen as the best at something. So again, this can mean putting yourself out there on social media for business, or, selling ourselves in some way, shape or form, needing to take up the space, be seen as the best at something, and guys do this all the time on social media and things like that in business. They, say I'm the best at, or, I'm changing the world by doing X. And you're like, well, you're not really, mate, to be honest. You're doing it, in your locality, right? I'm going to use Brighton as an example because that's where I reside. But they'll put it out there anyway. They'll put the thing out there even though they're not quite doing that yet. And for women, it's a massive trigger if we're feeling like, we should be doing that and our nervous system gets activated and we kind of just want to go and hide. I think we've all had those moments. I know for how open I might be in doing videos and things like that, and people are like, oh, you're so good at doing that, and the podcast or whatever, is, that wasn't comfortable for me 10 years ago. It really has been a process in terms of, needing to be seen and putting myself out there and believing in the message that I, want to share, but I still wouldn't say, for example, on the podcast, I'm, making the world see X. It just wouldn't occur to me to say something like that. And, there is our trigger of us needing to be seen. I think we talked about this on She Rebel Radio before as well. In ancient times, in Greek mythology, one of the worst things women could do was to be talked about. That is whether we'd done something good or whether we'd been having an affair, some noble, don't know if that's the right language, but, some other god somewhere, is just don't be talked about. So it's a real trigger for us when we often need to get out there and be talked about. The third trigger that can activate us or set us off is that dear old need to say no. To say no to the NPTs, the non-profitable, the non-promotable, and the non-pleasurable tasks. Or just saying no, full stop, is a trigger for us. Either we tend to fall in one of two camps. The first camp is we say yes is our default and we don't even think about it. We say yes and then we end up feeling triggered and resentful that we're doing the thing for the family member, for someone in the office, for someone via our business, giving them a free consultation or whatever it might be. And we start feeling resentful and we've got less space for the energetic yeses, which I talk about in episode 100 of She Rebel Radio, the energetic yes. And I was talking about saying no to the MPTs in our Empowerment Boost webinar to launch this series, and that is available for download in the show notes below, so check that out. Or you might be someone more like me, and my client and I were talking about this, that we are the women who say no. We do say no. It comes out of our mouths quite easily, but then we feel guilty. We feel guilty that we say no. We feel triggered by that. And then that creates a whole kind of narrative, which can be, de-energizing. We're not spending our energy in a good way by ruminating over whether actually maybe I should have said yes, or the fact that, whoever it is you said no to might not think you're very nice or you're in a bad mood or whatever it might be, right? So it's a trigger. Either way, we're damned if we do and we're doomed if we don't say no. So that is the third core trigger of this 3 triggers that women face and the 3 traps. So I would love to know whether these resonate with you. Please do find me on social media and share with me whether they do, which one does the most. And I would love to hear from you. It's been amazing to be with you on She Rebel Radio, as always, and sharing the traps and triggers of women leaders. Thank you for listening to She Rebel Radio. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman. Don't forget to also hit subscribe and leave us a review. You can find out more about me and my work at lulumins.com or on most social media platforms.